Hello everyone! Welcome to Bamboo Telescuela. This is your School on Air in Science 10. This is Menchi Tamayo Cruz of West Tabacal Region National High School from the SDO Kawayan City. This episode is being streamed live through DWND-FM, CMD Cable Channel 11, and at SDO Kawayan Facebook Live. We are now halfway done for the school year. I am sure you are all eager to listen. So, let's start. Let's begin with a recap of your previous lesson, which you have taken in your 7th grade to refresh your mind of what we are going to discuss today. Can you still recall the different systems of the human body? If you can recall more than 7 of the different body systems, then that's a good sign. Today we'll have the discussion of the reproductive system, male and female reproductive systems. Its parts and functions are taken up in the 9th grade, so the focus of our lesson is the female reproductive system, specifically on its physiological mechanisms. By the end of this video lesson, you are all expected to define menstruation and its cycle, enumerate the stages in the menstrual cycle and the hormones, and differentiate the negative and positive feedback mechanism in menstrual cycle. This topic is divided into two. In the first part, we will talk about negative and positive feedback mechanisms, and the second part is about menstrual cycle. Now, to understand better about feedback mechanism, let us first discuss homeostasis. In this lesson, we will first learn about homeostasis and all other mechanisms that help the body maintain this condition. Homeostasis is the process in maintaining a stable internal environment or keeping the body in a state of balance. There are 3 parts within the human body that help maintain homeostasis. The first part is a receptor, the second is the control center, and the third is an effector. How is homeostasis maintained? Let us look at the illustration. There are variables that can be changed or regulated. Variable is on the lever board. This lever board represents ideal normal values called set points. Any change away from the set point is called a deviation or imbalance. Let's take a closer look at a homeostasis in action. First, a stimulus produces change in the variable causing an imbalance. Second, a receptor detects the change. Third, the receptor sends information to the control center. Fourth, the control center sends signals to activate the effector. And finally, the response by the effector counters the imbalance produced by the initial stimulus to return the variable back to homeostasis. So, when a deviation occurs and the variable is no longer in homeostasis, the body will activate mechanisms that will oppose the deviation to return the body back to homeostasis. There are 2 mechanisms which help maintain homeostasis. The first mechanism is a negative feedback mechanism, and the second is the positive feedback mechanism. The negative feedback mechanism is a mechanism that opposes a deviation from the set point. It is the most common regulation mechanism to help maintain homeostasis. The rate of process is controlled to prevent the accumulation of a product. A very clear example of negative feedback is thermoregulation. The normal body temperature is 36 degrees Celsius. This represents the set point. Deviation occurs when the body temperature rises. Temperature receptors detect the temperature rise in the skin. These temperature receptors then send the information to the hypothalamus in the brain. The brain sends signals to activate the sweat glands, which cause them to brew sweat, which cools the body and lowers the body temperature. Sweating opposes the initial rise in body temperature. During cold weather, however, body temperature decreases. Again, temperature decrease is detected by the temperature receptors in the skin. These receptors send information to the hypothalamus in the brain, which will send signals to the skeletal muscles. The skeletal muscles will act by making us shiver. This shivering action will warm the body and raises the body's temperature. This also opposes the initial decrease in body temperature. Positive feedback mechanism, however, is a mechanism that responds to the deviation by making the deviation greater. It works to increase the accumulation of a product. However, this is a rare regulatory mechanism. This time, we are going to discuss positive and negative feedbacks in regulating the processes in the female reproductive system. Remember that positive feedback mechanism works to increase the production of a product, and negative feedback mechanism opposes the action by inhibiting or decreasing the accumulation of the product. Let us look at the illustrations. The first structure is the hypothalamus, which is the control center in the endocrine system. The hypothalamus sends messages to the pituitary gland, which is composed of two lobes, the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. If we are talking about the female reproductive system, what comes into our mind is the ovary, which is the main female reproductive organ. Also, the female reproductive system is also associated with the four hormones: the estrogen, gonadotropin-releasing hormone or GnRH, luteinizing hormone or LH, and progesterone. During the menstrual cycle, specifically before ovulation, small amounts of estrogen are secreted from the ovaries. This small amount of estrogen is enough to trigger the release of two other hormones, GnRH from the hypothalamus and LH from the anterior pituitary. This is an example of positive feedback because the release of estrogen product also triggered the release of GnRH and LH, more products. The GnRH will work with the anterior pituitary to stimulate the release of more amounts of LH into the blood. This is another example of positive feedback. Now, LH can also go ahead and stimulate the release of even more estrogen. Again, a positive feedback. Now, let us review the cycle. Estrogen causes the release of GnRH and LH. GnRH causes the release of more LH. LH causes the release of even more estrogen, and the cycle goes on, causing more GnRH and LH to accumulate in the blood. Now, when high amounts of LH are produced in the blood, it needs to be shut off. That's when progesterone wakes up. Progesterone is triggered when it senses that the LH level is too high and it is secreted from the corpus luteum after ovulation. The progesterone will trigger the GnRH production in the hypothalamus to turn off and will also trigger the LH production in the anterior pituitary to also turn off. Can you now guess what kind of feedback is this? If you answered negative feedback, you are correct. Looking at the levels of GnRH and LH in the blood, it is already too high. Something should cause an inhibition, so progesterone will come in, turning off the positive feedback process and decreases the product, which is the GnRH and LH. Let us review the positive and negative feedback loop in the female hormones. Estrogen, secreted from the ovaries, causes the release of GnRH from the hypothalamus, and GnRH also causes the release of LH. LH then causes the release of even more estrogen. If the LH level of the blood becomes too high, progesterone will inhibit the production and release of GnRH and LH. So this is how negative and positive feedback mechanisms work in this particular physiological mechanism to maintain homeostasis or balance. The menstrual cycle is the regular occurrence of menstruation. It is the monthly hormonal cycle that female's body undergoes in preparation for pregnancy. To summarize, the important events during the menstrual cycle are as follows. The pituitary gland controls and starts the cycle. This releases hormones that cause the egg in the ovary to mature. The luteinizing hormone, or LH, initiates the maturation of the follicles, converts ruptured follicles into corpus luteum, and causes the secretion of progesterone. The follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, assists in the maturation of the follicles and causes the secretion of estrogen from the follicles. Meanwhile, the ovary itself releases a hormone called estrogen, which causes the uterine lining to increase in thickness. The uterine lining becomes thicker so that the fertilized egg can attach to it. Now, assume that no sperm is present. The egg moves through the oviduct and enters the uterus. Meanwhile, the uterine lining continues to thicken. The thick uterine lining is no longer necessary, so the cells of the thickened uterine lining break off and leave the vagina. The unfertilized egg is lost and some blood is lost too. This loss of cells from the uterine lining, blood, and egg is called menstruation. After menstruation, the cycle starts again. That's all for now. I hope you have learned something today. It's now your turn to go over your modules and answer the activities and assessments. After doing so, you may submit your answer sheets in the designated areas assigned by your teachers. You may also submit it online through Facebook Messenger, Google Classroom, or any platform available. Once again, this is Menchi teacher in Science 10. Study well